Today is July 2nd, 2018, and you're listening to Human Factors Cast, episode 96. It's all about privacy, dark patterns, and correcting machine behavior with your brain. All here today on Human Factors Cast.
Welcome to Human Factors Cast, your weekly podcast for all things human factors, psychology, and design.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Human Factors Cast. I'm your host, Nick Roome, joined in studio by Mr. Blake Arnsdorff. There he is.
Just that look on your face. In studio.
In studio. We're here.
Yes, we're here.
Person
Live.
together. Why are we in studio? I don't know. We'll find out in a couple episodes, right?
There you go. Yep.
We're approaching episode 100. We'll find out.
We're getting there.
I think so. Not only am I joined by Mr. Blake
Arnsdorff.
Mr. Blake Arnsdorff, we also have a very special guest in studio with us as well, making his second appearance on the show. You might recognize Mr. Brian McDonald from our UXPA Boston bonus episode. Brian, how are you?
Doing well. Good to be back.
Good to have you. Okay, so we're all here in studio. We're hanging out. I wanted to know what's going on with you guys this week. Brian, I'm going to start with you because you've been on a bit of a road trip, coming of age trip, if you will, right?
Yeah, I wanted to do a big road trip after I graduated my undergrad, but I'm starting grad school in August, and so I'm road tripping around the country now. Started in Boston, made my way down to Atlanta, over to Austin, and now I'm here.
Now you're here in good old San Diego. We're going to take you to get some good, authentic Mexican food tonight, because you don't have that in Boston. That's for sure.
It also isn't snowing here, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, there you
Is it still
go.
snowing in Boston this time of year?
It feels like it.
Oh, my goodness.
Excellent. All right, Blake, what's going on with you, buddy? I got to know.
Oh, man. Well, it took a while to get the show set up, so that was a lot of fun. But the biggest thing that's probably going on with me, Nick, is probably what's going on with you. Was our wonderful day at work. Little interaction with some loud noises trying to get work done. And I thought about that all day. How do you get around that kind of stuff when you're at work? And I gotta say, listening to music was the only thing that saved my productivity today.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. And to anyone listening, I just want to emulate the sounds really quick. I hope this translates well. But it sounded like this all day at work. Like, no joke. That's
It's a little scary and ominous. But yeah.
I know, right? That's what it sounded like. I don't know how that translates to audio. We'll find out later. But we were dealing with that all day because of construction that was happening. And, well, I'm glad you found some way to be productive. You guys, I did something this weekend that I'm super proud of, and I don't know how to describe it. So we actually talked about this on Human Factors Cast Infinite at one point, where we're kind of talking about displaying pride in our collections of things like CDs or DVDs or Blu-rays or whatever it is, right? And this weekend, I kind of did this project where I took a poster board and lined it with magnetic strips, and I'm able to display my Steelbook collection. So you guys can see it here. I'll post a picture on the Slack about it, but it's just on my wall now, and it's just all my Steelbooks hanging up on the wall there.
Dude, that's amazing. It came out so much. I don't know. When you described it, I had no idea what it was going to look like, but this looks better than I would have ever imagined. That's awesome.
Yeah, so I was super stoked about it. It's really cool. You can see there's 2 spots remaining. There's 1 spot for solo, and then 2 more that we need to figure out how we're going to fill that up so that way it looks good. But you can totally expand it, and I don't know. I found myself like flipping the Steelbooks over to find the optimal sort of display pattern for what's most visually appealing, but also what kind of conveys your collection the best. And I don't know. I just had a great time with it.
You're the man. That looks awesome.
To share. Yeah,
for sure.
I did mention our Slack. You can go check out. I'm going to go post that picture right after the show up in our Slack, and you guys are going to remind me because we're all going out to dinner after this.
$20 that we all forget.
Yeah, no kidding. But I do want to plug just a couple things going on here. We have AHFE International. That is later this month, July 21st to the 25th in Orlando. We got HFES happening in Philadelphia, and that's from October 1st through the 5th. And then we have HFES Australia coming to Perth. We like to plug those at the beginning of every show to let everybody in the community know what's going on, where they can attend to get some updates on some of the research breakthroughs going on in the field. But you guys, you know what time of the show it is?
What time is it, Nick?
Well, it's time for Human Factors News. It's a part of the show all about human factors news. This is where we talk about everything related to the field of human factors. This could be anything you want it to be. Automation, psychology, design, VR, whatever it is, as it's fair game as long as it relates to the field of human factors. Blake, what do we got up first this week?
All right, so up first, the California legislature just passed one of the most robust data privacy bills in the U.S., known as the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018. The bill largely mirrors protections offered to European citizens under the most recently implemented General Data Protection Regulation, better known as GDPR. It's likely to drastically change the way that American companies store and trade in consumer information, at least for Californians anyway. So among other provisions, the new law will require companies to declare the types of data they will collect from users and with whom that data is shared. It further grants consumers the ability to opt out of having their data sold by companies like Facebook and will prevent companies from charging consumers money or providing them with fewer services if they do not allow the data to be sold. Top internet and telecommunications companies, including Facebook, Amazon, Google, AT&T, and Verizon, all of which profit by selling data. Wow. I didn't know they all profited by selling data. But they all profit by selling data belonging to users, at least initially, opposed the ballot measure. Though Facebook and Verizon both dropped their opposition in May, the bill was likewise opposed by Uber, which along with Facebook has been subject to recent federal investigation into handling of data practices. Now, maybe it's because we have Silicon Valley here in California, but I'm glad this started here in California with so many of these companies are headquartered at, because I think this will have a long-lasting implication for how we start treating consumer data. And it still surprises me that they were making so much money off of just selling consumer data.
It doesn't surprise me that the money was being made. I mean, we talk about that all the time, right? That's how these companies are profiting off of us as consumers. They are basically taking whatever information we allow them to get and selling it wholesale to whoever wants it or whoever will take it. The thing that's surprising to me is that it took so long to get some sort of protections in place for the consumer, right? And I mean, I know all this is kind of new. It's a new frontier for, these big tech companies. I mean, if you think about it, right, the internet's only been around for 20 years, improper, right? I mean, so the fact that these big companies are finding ways to sell data and profit off of this, I understand the lag time that it takes for law and legislature to catch up. Like I really am glad that the GDPR kind of kicked everybody in the butt and said, hey, let's get moving on this privacy thing. And this is nothing but good news.
Yeah, my favorite thing is it might actually make companies pay attention to the data that they have collected, because one little thing in the article says that it enables consumers to sue companies for up to $750 under certain circumstances if there's an unauthorized breach of their data. Equifax, anyone?
Oh, man. Well, imagine like all the companies that I think we've talked about on this show that were just like leaking data left and right. So that has like big implications for sure. And I think it's great that they're going to have to the companies are going to supposedly have to start really informing you what data they're taking and what they're doing with it. And if you opt out of it, the fact that this kind of legislature's already thought about the fact that, oh, okay, well, if somebody opts out of something, I'll just throttle their service in some way. But now they can't do that, so that's an interesting.
Yeah, there definitely will be a few companies that just don't offer services if you have a Cali address.
Oh, yeah, I can see that already happening, right?
Yeah, but I guess probably the big boys like Google and Facebook aren't just going to be like, yeah, we don't really care about the 7th largest economy in the world. No thanks.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Right. I mean, but okay, so what does this mean for us as consumers and really the user, right? So how does this kind of transform the way that we interact with these big companies that in the past have sold our data? And what does it mean going forward, right? I would argue that something like this would mean obviously more protections are in place for people who consume this type of this type of media, right? So I don't know. I can see this being nothing but a good thing for us, where especially if they do collect data, it doesn't mean that, and we'll get to this a little bit in our next story, does it mean that everything is kind of laid out for you from the get-go, right? Where is your data being used? Who gets access to it? does that mean that all that stuff is then elevated and I'm trying so hard not to jump to the next story because I like that one too. But, does that mean that everything is kind of elevated so that way there's no sneaky patterns, no hidden sort of terms of service that basically say, hey, thank you for your data. This is what we're going to do with it. And can we get to that straightforward, like, TLDR version of the terms of service, right? Like that's ultimately what I want, because those terms of services are so long, and I'm really mixing the stories here, and maybe we can talk about them wholesale, but I don't know, like what do you guys think this means for the user ultimately?
I mean, you don't read everything when you update iTunes?
No way, man.
Yeah, I fear that a lot of companies are going to do things that way if they can get away with it.
Yeah, I feel that same way. I mean, This ultimately puts the power back in users' hands, right? But you have to be able to digest the information in a way that makes sense to you, and so you can know where your data is going. And I'm making the assumption that companies are probably not going to make it super easy to understand what's going on in their terms and services agreements. I mean, that's kind of like a design implication, right? Like how are companies going to get over the fact that people are not going to read through these entire documents? Are they going to present it in some kind of different UI, something that's very simple, or are they going to keep kind of like hiding pieces in the background? I don't really know.
Well, I don't know. Maybe with our next story, we can think about. I just want to move on to the next story because I think these two can be talked about at the same time, and I think it's worth talking about these two at the same time because one is kind of reactionary to the other, and not necessarily, one came out before the other, but they came out around the same time, and they both informed this topic. So why don't you go ahead and read the next news story there, Blake?
Yeah, let's get the wholesale view. So Facebook and Google steer us into sharing vast amounts of information about ourselves through cunning design, privacy invasive defaults, and take it or leave it choices according to analysis of the company's privacy updates. So as the new GDPR is implemented across Europe, users of digital services have been confronted with new privacy settings through numerous pop-up messages. Unfortunately, the Norwegian Consumer Council just published an analysis that demonstrates companies appear to have little intention of giving users actual choices. Through the council's analysis, the company's privacy pop-ups, it's made evident that consumers are pushed into sharing through standard settings, cunning design choices, and confusing layout, all as an illusion of choice. Okay, I think that answered a lot of questions for like what companies were actually doing. It seems like a forced choice here, where you don't really get around the fact that okay, they should be designing this in a way for you to understand.
Yeah, I want to get into a couple of these points. So you mentioned standard settings, cunning design choices, confusing layout, and illusion of choice. I want to get into what those exactly mean here. So standard settings, this is basically pre-selected settings. This is the dark patterns that we've talked about on the show multiple times. And this study basically came out and said, well, in many cases, both Facebook and Google have set the least privacy-friendly choice as the default, right? Something that will benefit them, something that will allow your data to be kind of exposed and what's the word I'm looking for, guys?
Just kind of be exploited.
Yeah, that's the word. X.
Yeah.
I knew it was an X word. Exploited. So, I mean, that's the standard settings. These are the dark patterns that we talked about before on the show. Then you have cunning design choices, and this is where it kind of hits the. I mean, all this kind of hits the human factors nook, but the cunning design choices are sharing of personal data and the use of targeted advertising are presented as exclusively beneficial through wording and design, often in combination with threats of loss of functionality if users decline. And this one has huge implications, right? I mean, think about you're basically at the mercy of these terms of services, and they are making that abundantly clear. If you break their user policy, then you can no longer use their service. And it's like, well, you have to give us your data or else, basically. That's basically what this cunning design choices bullet is talking about here.
Yikes, and that's one of those things where it's like in the legislation we just read for California, at least. I don't know what this is like in the GDPR. Like, you're supposed to be safeguarded against that. Like, you're getting services throttled or getting kind of functionality taken away. But it sucks for us because in a lot of cases when you're talking about Google or Facebook, in the case of Google, there's definitely alternatives, but I don't know if their data privacy policies are the same or similar. But for Facebook, I mean, there's really not a whole lot of alternative choices you can make to have the same kind of platform. So they've got you kind of in a hole.
MySpace.
Oh, yeah, let's go back to MySpace.
Friendster.
Yeah, I'll put you guys in my top 8 there. Yeah, I completely agree with you, Blake. I think I don't know how this interplays with the GDPR, especially for the California thing, right? And if they are supposed to protect against this thing, what does that ultimately mean for the way that they phrase these topics, right? Does it mean that they are going to be upfront about it? And maybe we can talk about this in conjunction with the next point, which is confusing layout, right? So this is the privacy-friendly choices require significantly more clicks to reach and are often hidden away. So this is like if you're on Facebook, right? Facebook's a platform that a lot of us are familiar with. If you go onto Facebook, you have to go up into settings and then you have to go into security settings. And I think we actually did this on Infinite at one point where we kind of did this live.
We did like a walkthrough of the actual settings for both Instagram and for Facebook, even to like pull data that they had collected on you.
Right. And it ended up being that it was easier than we thought, but also for the common user, for someone, the everyday Joe who isn't as plugged into this stuff as we are, I don't think it's going to be as easy for them. It's tucked away in a place that is hard to find. I will say, though, to Facebook's credit, I did see this the other day where they said, it's time to update your privacy settings front and center, right in your feed. So, I mean, they got that going for them. I don't know if that's a result because of the GDPR. My guess is
it's a result of all of their bad press, but they did kind of do a pretty good redesign.
Yeah. I mean, it's good that they're elevating that stuff, to the forefront. But I still think there's a lot that we can do better for making sort of these privacy settings available to the user. And then the last one here is illusion of choice. And this one really kind of rubs me the wrong way. I think this one is incredibly misleading when you think about it. So in many cases, the services obscure the fact that users have very few actual choices and that comprehensive data sharing is accepted by using the service. The feeling of control may also convince users to share more information.
See, that one's the biggest problem to me because especially because there's probably a bunch of apps that either before like all this stuff with Cambridge Analytica and Facebook really started like hitting the news that I'm sure never asked me if they wanted to collect my data, and they were always doing it. And that's the part that I guess kind of freaks me out the most, or is also confusing. Like you don't necessarily have to consent to your data being collected at all.
Right? Yeah, and they can do it, and that's scary to me. And I don't know. It's studies like this that kind of bring light to these types of things that are being exploited, that are exploiting its everyday users, and all this privacy stuff together is a story that we'll be sure to follow and kind of update y'all. Blake, you're rubbing off on me. It's the in-person thing, man.
Update y'all.
You don't say y'all.
I really don't. I'm like the least Southern person you'll ever meet.
Yeah, I mean, you got a little twang.
Little twang.
Little twang.
A little bit.
Yeah, I don't know. I think this has big implications for privacy going forward. Both the the California bill and also this study, I think, bringing to light these issues for the public. I think that is the ultimate sort of the best way to go, right? Because knowledge is power, and if the general populace is empowered with this knowledge, then they can arm themselves and say, hey, look, you're using my data in a way that's not okay.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and I think hopefully people are much more concerned about making sure that all, like across their social media especially, that they're really trying to pay attention to what kind of privacy settings they are allowing. And I definitely encourage anybody to kind of check out online, like either through just Google search, like how to protect yourself on Facebook or any of that kind of stuff. Because, I mean, for the next foreseeable future, although these kind of pieces of legislature are coming into the United States at least, I still feel like we're going to be suffering dark patterns for a little while.
Yeah. Brian, did you have any closing thoughts? I got a lisp today. I don't know what's going on. It's a weird day, guys. Like, just behind the scenes, we took over an hour setting up in this new studio with all the podcast stuff, so it's a little...
It's a brand new setup. It's all kind of confusing.
Oh, man. Why? 100 episodes. You'll find out. All right. Brian, sorry, I took the floor.
No, I have no real closing thoughts besides that if companies can do it, they're going to do all of the dark patterns until someone forces them to not.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if they can do it, they will. And until the law says they can't. And I think, it's up to us to kind of keep pushing back, say we have rights, and see what happens.
Well, that's the nice thing about being like practitioners in a design style field, right? Like we do have to some degree say in the products that we help produce and things like that. But you at the same time you get stuck. Or you don't get stuck. I mean, working for Google is a great thing. I mean, I know a lot of friends that I have enjoy it, but you're kind of at the mercy of whatever the company is going to do design-wise or what their kind of values are. And I think it's like up to not just like consumers, but also people that practice in the field to really push the envelope towards like making sure the end user is the one that's in power, not just the millions and millions of dollars making company, or billions, I guess in this case.
Right. We have to be the advocate for the user, and ultimately, what they see. We have to advocate that they see up front. And this is kind of the point that I was talking about with the California bill. Like, can we provide a TLDR version of your privacy settings? Hey, look, we're going to sell this to these companies. Still provide all the legalese down below. But what does it mean for me as a consumer? Like, I would love that.
Yeah, and like understandable language too. Like I understand how the world works, and we have to have legalese in there, but like spell it out for people within like a couple sentences per like point that they have to worry about.
Hey, your age, sex, location are going to be sent to this advertising agency. That simple. That simple. All right, well, before we move on, I just want to thank all of our friends over at Gizmodo. I'm going to mess this up. For Barucher Redette and TechCrunch for all of our stories this week. If you guys want to follow along with all the stories as we find them, you can check us out on Slack, like I mentioned earlier. Link to that is in the show notes and wherever you can find us, pretty much. And we post those across all social media, too. So, Blake, why don't we get into the last story of the week?
Let's go. So how do you tell your robot not to do something that could be catastrophic? You could give it a verbal or a programmatic command, or you could have it watch your brain for signs of distress and have it stop itself. That's what researchers at MIT Robotics Research Lab have done with a system that is wired to your brain and tells robots how to do their jobs. The initial system was fairly simple. A scalp EEG and EMG system is connected to a Baxter Work robot, which lets a human wave or gesture when the robot is doing something that it shouldn't be doing. For example, the robot could regularly do a task, like drilling holes, for example, but when it approaches an unfamiliar scenario, the human can gesture at the task that should be done. Because the system uses nuances like gestures and emotional reactions, you can train robots to interact with humans with disabilities and even prevent accidents by catching concern or alarming them before it's communicated verbally. This lets workers stop a robot before it damages something and even help the robot understand slight changes to its task before it begins. The team will be presenting their findings at the Robotics, Science and Systems Conference this year. All right, so this is kind of a lot to unpack in it, seeing that it's a robot that's basically kind of reading your mind.
Yeah, let's unpack it. So basically what it's saying is that this robot is set up with some sort of preset automation, and it is providing the human with some way to interject commands by, in this case, it's by either a gestural motion or with an EEG or EMG waves, right? So in this example, so there's a video on the website. Basically, the robot is drilling into this cardboard, and the human is, when the robot encounters a situation in which it's ambiguous or potentially dangerous in a real world application, the human can say, nope, don't do that, and they can gesture to it, and the robot would theoretically stop.
Yeah, I could really see this working in the future for like a foreman on an installation site or a construction site. You could actually have like multiple robots working, and then that person could be like, oh no, wait, you're doing something wrong, Mr. Robot.
Yeah, I mean, that's like another implication of it would be like a remote operated system, right? Like if somebody's sitting away from a bunch of robots that are working just using, because this wouldn't be gesture based, it would just be brain signal based. But if you're like let's say you're watching a UAV and it's like turning off of course, you could, I guess, think the correct task or command, and it could change its course or something like that.
You could still do gestures with sensors in place at the pilot's
Oh yeah, because then you can just feed it right back into the robot.
Like, nope, don't do that. Yeah, I don't know. You looked confused there, Blake. What?
Okay. So I've got this funny thing where every time that we see kind of robots from MIT, they tend to put a nice little face on it.
Oh yeah, they do.
Just like, so for anybody who's not seen the article or watched the video, I mean, it's basically like a one-legged robot that's got like a singular arm with a bunch of like action points on it, and it's holding a drill, but it has basically a small iPad on its face that's like a little digitized smiley face.
Yeah.
So that's just funny. I mean, it's starting to humanize a robot, right? And without it, I mean, it might be a scary-looking machine. And so that's what was going through my mind is like we continue to try and, you know, give personas or personify like inanimate objects, but I think that's ultimately how we're going to be more comfortable with robotics and AI and stuff like that. Having some element of it that you feel comfortable interacting with.
Yeah, I think the face is also a good feature because I think it changes if like it encounters a problem. So it's not always smiling.
Oh, that's
how it
point.
communicates that like, oh no, it's stuck.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's some sort of nonverbal feedback, right? So you can actually see in the video that we're referencing here, as the robot makes a mistake, it does like a little frowny face, and it basically is saying, "I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Didn't mean to. Won't happen again." Human overlord, yeah, I don't know. It's fun to watch.
And I like the face because, you know, it has no language barriers.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that's a huge sort of point for human robot interaction. Because there are a lot of these human gestures that we need to translate to the robot, so that way, that are nonverbal. Because there's so much nonverbal communication that happens among humans. Like, we are now in the same studio, and I said that so many times, but now we can actually read each other's faces. We can read each other's body language. When I don't know what to say, somebody else jumps in, and I do the same. And, you know, if you can kind of understand, maybe even something like that could show how uncertain a robot is around a task, right? Like, happy face, I know I'm doing the right drill job, but if it approaches a situation where it doesn't understand, then it could turn into like a neutral face or an uneasy face, right? Because we have those uneasy faces. Like, I don't know what I'm doing here. And then, then the human will then be tuned into, okay, well, maybe I should pay more attention here if it's a supervisory role. And then they jump in and direct it with these things. I just think it's an interesting way to, it's a novel way to interact with robots that we haven't seen before. I mean, we've seen EEG stuff, but this is this is preventing mistakes in robots. And I just find that interesting.
Yeah, I really like it because you don't have to like press a button and remember and like always be there ready to press that button. You just know something's wrong, and then the machine knows something's wrong.
I think you bring up a really interesting point too, Nick. I mean, it's funny because when I think of like the verbal cues that we get when you're like talking to somebody, it's almost impossible to try and think of how you're going to teach all of that almost body language type stuff to a robot. But with just the face, I think that's enough to be able to communicate to a human, or potentially even between robots, but definitely to a human. Like, okay, something's not right with this particular robot during this task. And it's kind of funny how we're basically trying to recreate some aspects of our own like biology and communication styles into something completely new.
Right, yeah. I don't know. It's always so interesting to me. Did you guys have any other closing thoughts before we move on to It Came From Reddit? Because we got a lot of good ones here today.
Let's do it.
All right. It's that part of the show again.
It came from...
That's right. It came from Reddit. I am fumbling all over myself here in studio today. It's okay. It's a trial run. We're figuring stuff out here. This is the part of the show where we search all over Reddit to bring you topics the community's talking about, and it's a
to bring you Reddit things to talk about.
Reddit things, yeah. We're talking. Okay, all right. You know what? I don't even. We're talking any subreddit's fair game, as long as it relates to human factors and encourages discussion among the community. All right, nailed it. All right, take two. No, okay. So we got a fair amount of time here, guys. Do you want to just take these like cereal? Like,
let's do it.
All right. So
what kind of cereal?
Cinnamon Toast Crunch. There we go. Okay, so this first one here, is it unusual? This is from Ludens Dude from the User Experience subreddit. Is it unusual? I never had to do a UX design test or exercise during interviews. They go on to write, recently a friend who was trying to break into UX asked me how my design tests or exercises were like during my UX interviews. Her question made me realize that I was never asked to do any design tests or exercises during the countless UX interviews I have gone on in the past few years. Is this unusual? I recently switched over to UX from a related industry about 3 years ago. All right, guys, I want to hear from your experience. We'll start with you, Brian. Have you experienced any sort of like UX design test or exercise during the application process?
No, I've always just been like, hey, here's my portfolio. And then they go, oh, okay, cool. Or, no. It's never any, here's a cool test.
Okay.
That's just my...
That's interesting. I mean, how about in person? Like, did they ever interview you in person and do like any sort of design challenge where you're supposed to come up with some sort of... Nothing, huh?
No, I haven't yet. Everyone's just been like, okay, so talk about this and why you did this and why you did that.
That's interesting. Blake, I imagine you have a very different experience.
Actually, no.
Really?
Yeah, because here's why I think that's the case. So for jobs that I've always interviewed for, I've not really had any design tests, and I think it's because of kind of what Brian's talking about here. Is like they look at your portfolio, they get a sense of how you think, and they'll ask amplifying questions. And also, too, this guy's saying that this was about 3 years ago. I feel like unless you were in companies like Google or Amazon or stuff like that, they really weren't doing a whole lot of this design challenge testing. Because even in the place that I work now, that's only been implemented in the past like couple of years, like adding in design challenges and stuff like that to make you think on the fly. So I've never experienced it personally. And for other jobs that I've gotten, it's been kind of word of mouth. So they're trusting basically the person who recommends you.
See, so they said they switched over to UX from a related industry about 3 years ago. That's not saying that their interviews were 3 years ago. So I've actually had a very different experience. 2 of the 3 jobs in the most recent round they had a design challenge attached to it. And I don't know if that's just the nature of the job that I was applying for or what, but I found it I found it a very valuable experience to my personally myself. And one of so let me go over these really quick. So one of them, I won't name companies just to kind of be fair here, but one of them, the design challenge was design an interface for this unique situation. Again, I won't say the situation just out of respect for the company, but so it was very much like, okay, well, what information do I have, and how can I best come up with a design in I think it was 30 minutes or less or something like that. And you kind of use all your skills, and that way it kind of informs them of your process. Now with another company, it was very different kind of design interview or design challenge. It was very much like if you think about a user research, right? The question was, and again, I won't name companies, but the question was, if you could design your own study that you had as much funding as you needed, how would you run it? What would you study? And what would sort of the research methods be for that? And I thought that was really interesting. And it was something I wasn't expecting at all for this kind of interview, because it really got at sort of your knowledge, your intimate knowledge of research methodology. And, it also got at sort of your high level interests, like where do you see yourself in X amount of years, right? If you had all the resources you need to do this, how would you do it? I thought that was really interesting. And the third company I mentioned didn't do anything like that. So I don't know. What do you guys think of that?
I love the fact that you had to do that for like a research design position, because I mean that really shows process for people like that, because I think that's the benefit of even doing these design challenges, is watching somebody think kind of in real time, but that's not always kind of analogous to what's going to go on in a company. You're going to work in a team and you'll have kind of bolstering, but at least get you an idea of what their problem solving skills are like. But if it's in the area of research, it's more of, okay, so how do you define problems? How do you define solving how to understand that problem better? And then where do you see yourself in terms of technology in the next, 5-10 years? So that's a really awesome, like, a kind of take on it to apply it to a UX research job.
Yeah, I don't even know if you would count that as a design challenge, but I always did, right? Because in that moment, I was designing a research study.
Yeah, and I think part of it too, I mean, they call them design challenges, but to me, it's like, I want to watch you problem solve.
Yeah.
Regardless of what the outcome of it is, whether you're designing something or you're talking about a study or you're saying like, this is how I would do sales or whatever it is.
Right.
I just want to see you problem solve.
Right. And it's all a matter of processing what information you have. Sorry, excuse me. It's all about processing what information you have, and also sort of what information you need and how do you sort of work within the constraints that you are dealt. So I'm surprised that we have such a wide range of experience on this.
I'm not too surprised because I do think it is like two different methods, because you can, like, every interview I've had has always been like really deep into like the portfolio pieces, but it's like, so why'd you do this? What were your constraints? Why'd you do this thing? So I think you can still get a lot of good information that way.
Oh yeah.
Just from a different avenue, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's all different ways to get at the same information. I just I don't know if design challenges are on their way out or what, but curious to know that you guys haven't had one.
Or maybe they're just less of an East Coast thing. I don't know.
I don't know.
I definitely don't think they're on their way out. I think I've seen or heard more and more people talk about them since I got my first job. So I think it's definitely like ramping up and it's going to continue to be like proliferating through companies, because I think people want to see what you can do versus what's on your portfolio. Because that's another kind of thing to talk about too, is you like sometimes you get people's portfolios and they're super polished, but they don't really have the skills you need.
Right.
They've had somebody help them with it. They couldn't really talk through it. So this is a way to kind of weed that out.
I agree. I think it's a way to get people to think on their toes and see how they kind of problem solve under pressure, right? Because if you think about it, job interviews are a really stressful time. You're trying to put on your best self to sell yourself to this company, whatever you're applying for, and you're also trying to sell your capability to perform the tasks necessary. And so, all that on your shoulder, they're asking you to do something on the fly where you don't have all the information, and it's literally seeing how somebody thinks on their toes in a high stress environment. And I think that's really valuable.
Yeah, I mean that's basically what your job's probably going to be like, right?
Yeah. All right. So we mentioned portfolios. It's kind of related to this next one here. This one is by The Only Q in user experience subreddit. They ask, is a social presence necessary? They go on to write, this sub is a pretty diverse group, the user experience subreddit. So I'm wondering what y'all think about the need for a Twitter and Instagram presence as a UX professional. I assume it's very different for those of you working at bigger companies versus freelancers, but I'm curious, can conventional marketing and networking work better or just as well as having a fancy Instagram account? Is it that much better? Is it that much harder, rather? This was going to be more of a career sticky question, but I think it might be interesting to have a fuller discussion on the topic. So let me get your guys' opinions here. Blake, is a social presence necessary? If so, why? If not, why?
All the whys. You know how I'm going to answer this question.
Yes.
It depends.
Oh, okay.
No, I mean, I think it'll help you a lot. I mean, they do make the mention of versus like being in a bigger company versus a freelancer. And if you're doing freelance, you don't have any social presence, I think it'll really help you out, because I mean, you can start displaying different ways about how you think about things, making connections. Like it's almost just another marketing generation tool, right? So it can be super helpful, but I think it's also going to depend on what kind of company you're in, because a lot of them don't want your work being shown or process being shown on social media. So you'd have to kind of get creative about how you're talking about yourself through those channels. I think at the end of the day, it's kind of up to you if you want to put the effort into it, or a lot of people like to keep it on kind of like a personal life kind of thing when it comes to Twitter or professional stuff. I like to do a mix of both, to be honest, because I feel like through social media and the internet in general, we just have a lot more access to different kinds of people. Like I've been able to connect with people that have worked at Twitter or worked at Google through social media interactions. And so it's helped me kind of like understand how they work and also like just have meaningful discussions back and forth. So I think it depends on what you want out of it. And I think that's the better way to gauge it. Like if you're trying to build your network and get more clients, it's definitely something worth putting your time and money into.
Brian, what about you?
I think it's important for the long game, but I don't think it's super important if you're like trying to get clients the next week. But to me, the most useful thing is being able to follow someone on one of those feeds, and then over the years, you see they keep popping up, so then you keep remembering them. Right. I follow a bunch of designers, and that's how I remember all of my favorite ones.
Right. So what it sounds like is, if you want to be if you want to have some sort of notoriety, then you go to social media. You establish credibility by sharing valuable information, and you have to be careful if you're in a company where you can't share that information. And potentially finding creative ways could be a way to share information. So I like what I'm hearing. Me personally, I think a social media presence helps. I don't like I'm a hard. It helps. I'm not saying it's going to get you a job. I'm not saying it is necessary. I'm just saying I think it helps when recruiters or HR or whoever is going through your application. They do Google searches on you. That's not a secret. They go out and look at you on your social presence. And if it shows that you are super involved in the community, that you're giving back in ways that are beneficial, but not sort of giving away the secret sauce, if you will, about a company's secrets, I think that's helpful because then they want that associated with their brand. They want some sort of ambassador with a community that can go out and reach out and potentially pull in more talent if they know people. I don't know. I just think it helps all around, right? And I'm saying that in air quotes. It helps in the sense that, it's not the end all be all. It's not going to get you hired. It's not going to, if you do it incorrectly, it could get you fired. So don't do that. So you just got to be careful with it. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point, Nick. If you're gonna have it, if you're gonna use social media and it's all personal stuff, definitely be careful and
privacy
scrub what's
settings
on there. Yes,
privacy settings.
Figure that out really quick. Because if you thought like back when Facebook came out that they were screening it, recruiters are definitely screening all of that stuff now.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, okay. So the answer to that was it depends. Okay.
Of course it was.
Of course it was. Okay, so we got time for a couple more here. Looks like we got two. This one is, how do you like to create user flow diagrams? This one's from Stoic Assistant in the user experience subreddit. Do you illustrate them in Sketch, another program? Is there a flow diagram template that you like to use? Thanks for your help. Blake, I know you are an expert in flow diagrams.
Yes, I am. I love flow diagrams. They're my favorite. Honestly, I don't know. I got this from actually watching you at one point.
Oh God.
Yeah. So, like, it's great to have some kind of polished product that's in Sketch or Illustrator or whatever it is that your design like weapon of choice. But at the same time, I think the best way to put these together is to actually just use sticky notes. You like putting them on a wall and being able to move that stuff around, categorize it in a way that is meaningful, and it's actually a much more collaborative process. Like there's nothing worse to me than like getting something to some point polished enough to show somebody else, and then you're going to have to just make a bunch of changes or redline a bunch of edits. I would rather have all the necessary people in the room, even if you can get a user too, right? And be moving parts of the workflow around. Like that's just kind of how I like to tackle it. I think a polished product, yeah, I'd put it in Sketch or whatever you really like. I mean, there are some other like flow template diagram programs out there. None of them are coming to my head. I know there's like plugins for both Sketch and Illustrator that help you kind of animate those things. But honestly, I like sticky notes and paper.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of one right now that I just was made aware of a couple weeks ago, I guess. It's basically, I wish I could remember the name. I'm looking through my emails to see if I can at least give them a plug, but apparently there is a program for iOS that allows you to take pictures of sticky notes. I will agree with you, Blake, that sticky notes is by far the best way to do things. You can move things around. You can collaborate with others in an easy way, especially users, right? If you're trying to sort of come to an agreement on what a task flow looks like, it's super easy to share with users and look at that. But there is a program, I wish I could find it, but basically if you snapshot the sticky notes on the wall, it will translate it into a digital XML file.
That's pretty awesome.
Which is really neat, right? So, and then you can manipulate it in XML, and it organizes it in just the right way, apparently. I don't know. I can't speak to it, and I can't find the name. So it's out there. It exists, but that's all I got. But I agree. I think sticky notes is a huge... You know me, Blake. I wonder who pulled the came from Reddit this week, because workflows are a big part of my life, and
he's the workflow master over there. Don't let him convince you otherwise.
I'm really not. Let's be clear. I've just had a lot of experience with them. Brian, do you do workflow analysis, and what tools do you use?
The only times I've used them is sticky notes, paper, and then eventually Illustrator. Okay,
so you do them in Illustrator. I will plug one other tool, and Blake, I don't know if you have used this one at all. Draw.io
No, I've heard of it, and I think it was you that turned me on to it, and I had every intent to use it, but never did.
Okay, so it is for those listening, it is a free tool online that allows you to do XML workflow generation. It's pretty cool. It's a little clunky, but it's free. So if you're an aspiring student or a freelancer, it could be a good way to sort of build things in a digital environment. I will say, though, echoing you, Blake, sticky notes are the ultimate way to go. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Yeah, and you made another great point, right? And that's that when you bring a user in, it's just a lot easier to move things around, and then you can also observe them and the way they're thinking. It's kind of like a double-edged, or you get two benefits for the price of one. You're kind of watching how they think, but you're also getting very valuable like process data or flow data. So I don't know. Again, it's like another reason to keep the sticky note around.
Right. You can get that live validation, but also, not just collaboration with users, but collaboration with other professionals that you may be working with too. If one configuration of the workflow makes sense to you, but that doesn't make sense to them, you can actually physically move things around, take pictures, so that way you can version control using pictures. I don't know. There's a lot of benefits to just doing physical. If you have to document using digital pictures, that's ultimately and then once you've refined a lot, then you codify it and you actually put it into a digital format once it's like completely thought through. And that's all I'll say about workflows. Okay, we got time for one more, so let's actually go ahead and get into this one. I said actually because that's in the title here. This is it actually possible to get into UX without a college degree? This is, again, from the user experience subreddit by bthug27. Woo! So, this is by bthug27. They go on to write, now I do have a bachelor's. It's just not in UX. I don't mind going back to school to get a degree in UX or human factors. This is a human factors podcast. It's okay. We can branch out, though. But I was wondering if it's possible to shift my career towards UX without getting a traditional degree. Are there any chances of working in UX pretty good? Are the chances of working in UX pretty good without a traditional degree, or is it more of an anomaly? I'm going to open this up to you first, Blake.
Oh, yeah. Put me on the spot. No, this would have been tough for me to answer had I not had the experiences that I have recently, I guess. So I come from a human factors background with a master's, so it's a little bit different. I understand the methodology that underlies UX, so I've had more luck getting jobs because I'm able to show some kind of transfer. If you have some sort of bachelor's, I feel like the best way to pitch it or help yourself get the job you want that's in UX is volunteer for some kind of user experience, or if it's human factors, same thing. Volunteer in a human factors or a user experience group, as part of their board or something like that, because usually that can help you, one, figure out the skills, get mentorship, find small jobs that you can do, and show kind of proof of your ability to manage yourself as just a freelancer or anything like that. But having some kind of background, because I've worked with a lot of people that are trying to move from marketing and insights into user experience design. So it's all about being able to spin what your experience in the past and how it actually could benefit doing a UX job, or how you see it your skills translating. So I don't know if not having a traditional degree, if you don't have a degree at all, I feel it's going to be a lot harder, but it's all going to be about past experience, how you talk about it, how you're framing it into user experience or the HF world. I still think you're going to have to, especially if you come from a non-research background or not even a design background, you're going to have to kind of augment that through reading, taking online courses, again, getting mentorship through kind of organizations or something like that. But I think it's possible without a degree, but it's definitely going to be harder.
Yeah. Brian, I want your thoughts on this before I jump in.
I wonder what B-Thug really means when he says UX, because that's kind of a huge term.
Right.
I do think it's easier to get a design job than a research job if you only have a portfolio, because then you have the clear evidence that you can at least make stuff look the way that they want to have and
right,
that sort of thing. And I know you can volunteer with groups and go to hackathons and get lots of experience that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say though, I think both of you are right. I think but I will say I think there's sort of a prejudice towards the research position. I don't think take it or leave it for what it is. I think there's more of a value, at least in the community, for research positions, right? UX research versus UX design. I think the research part of it is heavily skewed towards having a relevant degree, whether or not that's a bachelor's in human-computer interaction or master's in human factors, or a bachelor's in design. It doesn't matter. I think having a relevant degree is more important for a research role, because then you're kind of trained from grassroots. You've gone through a program that has been sort of forged for the thing that you need to do, versus having very applicable skills in one sense and then transferring them over. That's just my opinion, though. I don't know. I'm curious if you guys think that's the case, or you guys get that sense that there's some sort of prejudice towards those that don't have relevant degrees.
Yeah, for UX research positions, it's definitely going to be like twofold harder, because you see a lot of companies, like it's not just limited to Amazon and Google anymore too. Like UX research positions are not just going after people that have had that title before. They want like a cognitive psychologist. They want somebody that's got a doctorate in HCI. So they're
and also been coding for 12 years.
Oh, wait, well, that's a whole nother topic to have a
Unicorns.
discussion on. Yeah, they want like the super ultra unicorn, PhD style. But I don't know. I have to tend to agree with you. And the only caveat I have is if you're somebody, and you'll probably disagree with this to some degree, but I think if you have experience coming from something like doing marketing insights, so you're used to dealing with a lot of data and trying to figure out what's going on within like a certain set of numbers, but still you're not going to have like usability testing knowledge. That's not going to be there. So I think you make a good point. I still think you're able to spin it, but if you don't if you're going for like a UX research job that's doing heavy usability testing, you're going to have a really hard time getting in it.
Yeah. I will say, I think, I'm talking about relevant degrees. And I think, marketing is relevant enough for that skill transfer. I think there's a lot of intense research going on about the end user and what their wants are and what appeals to them in marketing. And I don't think it's that big of a jump to go into UX from that. I think it's a matter of applying it to sales versus applying it to design. And obviously there has to be some sort of learning that happens there, but I think it's close enough to where there wouldn't be there wouldn't be discrimination against those who had different degrees. I don't know, that's just my thoughts on it.
I feel like one way you could skirt some of this too is if you are like heavily volunteering in like groups related to the field and you're looking for internships. Because that might, especially if you've got like somebody that can help swing your favor, or it can like recommend you to a friend of a friend, that might be the easiest entryway if you really just don't have a relevant degree. Because with internships, you at least get some of that on-the-job training aspect of it. So maybe you're picking up some of the skills. Maybe you're good enough that they keep you around, so you're able to like really get the education on the job, which is always going to be better in my opinion.
I agree.
But I don't know. The more we talk about it, the harder I think it's going to be without some kind of at least tangentially related degree.
Yeah. Brian, any closing thoughts?
I wonder how much marketers learn about ethics, and to me, researchers really should.
Yeah, they really should.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother can
Limitations.
of worms. Blake, any closing thoughts?
No. Now I'm just thinking about the ethics of research. That's a whole other thing.
Okay, well, that's going to be it for today, guys. Let us know what you guys think of the stories and It Came From Reddit today. If you liked them, did you hate them? If you're a Patreon supporter, please stay tuned for the after show. That's coming soon. The rest of you can join us in the discussion on our Slack or follow us all over social media. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter at HFactors Podcast. Be sure to drop us a comment on our SoundCloud or send us an email at humanfactorscast@gmail.com. If you're feeling saucy, leave us a voicemail at 901-646-1432. That's 901-646-1HFC. Be sure to like, subscribe, review us on Apple Podcasts. Google Podcasts is out there now, or whatever your favorite podcast directory is. If you want to join the after show party, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/humanfactorscast, just like Brian does. And, of course, you can always reach us at our home on the web, humanfactorscast.com. I want to thank my favorite co-host for being here on the show today, Blake Arnsdorff. Where can our listeners go and find you if they want to talk about ethics.
Oh, if you want to talk about ethics, you can find me on Twitter at Don'tPanicUX.
Brian McDonald, thank you so much for being on the show. Where can our listeners go and find you?
I am also on Twitter at Brian C. McDonald, and I'm always on the Slack channel.
Excellent. As for me, I've been your host, Nick Roome. You can find me across social media at Nick_Roome. Thanks again for tuning into Human Factors Cast. Until next time,
It depends.
Yes,
Oh.
we did it all at the same time. That was great. See, this is what we get for doing it in person. It's
Been
great.
so long.
Factors Cast Southern Edition. So many y'alls.
Y'all.